Hey, folks, it's John Kraska with Every Library, the Every Library Institute. I'm executive director over here at Every Library with the National Political Action Committee for Libraries. The Every Library Institute's public policy, tax policy, education policy think tank for libraries. We're hosting a series of talks right now with authors who spend a lot of time in the YA middle school visits space about a couple things. One is their books. It's always interesting to talk to authors about their creativity. I want to talk to them about talking to kids and students and educators and teachers, but also what's going on in America right now, because we are in the middle of or at the beginning perhaps, of a fairly contentious time. We're concerned right now about what's happening in K-12, executive orders coming out of the Trump administration, the chilling effect that's happened already in states like Florida and Texas and Oklahoma and other places. We want to bring forward these authors to have a real good human conversation about what it's like to be writing right now, what it's like to try and talk to educators and students, and what's it all mean for us here in the United States. Every library works on anti-censorship and anti-discrimination campaigns all the time. If you're running into problems at your school district, give us a shout. Our Fight for the First campaign site, it's a lot like change.org for libraries, where we can onboard a crisis campaign and start speaking about what the Constitution says, what the law says about education, and how to get back to a place that's right for those students and their families. It's a pleasure today for me to be able to bring in two wonderful authors for a big conversation. And let me do the formal intros, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so Jasmine Warga is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of middle grade novels, Other Words for Home. Sorry, Jasmine. The Shape of Thunder, A Rover Story, and A Strange Thing Happened in Cherry Hall. Her books have won numerous awards, including the Newbery Honor. She lives in the Chicago area with her family. Abdi Nazemian, my apologies, Abdi, is the award-winning author of Only This Beautiful Moment, Like a Love Story, Desert Echoes, and more, a Stonewall Honor and a Lambda Literary Award winner. His work has been recognized among Time Magazine's best YA books of all time. Also a screenwriter and producer, he lives in Los Angeles with his husband, children, and dog, Disco. Abdi, I'm going to take you out, though, first. I'll bring you back in and apologize for doing that to your last name again in a second. Jasmine, in the meantime, it is so nice to meet you. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, you've got two books we want to talk about today in particular, Other Words for Home and A Rover Story. The themes in these books are beautiful. It's about belonging. It's about self-discovery. It's about, I hope that there's some real joy in reading it. What inspires you to write books like this?
Well, I think that I often return to themes of belonging and home because that was sort of a central question of my childhood. My father is a Palestinian immigrant from Jordan, and my mom is sort of a white Midwesterner. And I grew up sort of at the intersection of that, of trying to figure out where my home was, what was home, what did it mean to have to leave home and make a new home, which was sort of the central story of my father's side, and what did it mean to live in one place for a long time and have that place always feel like home, which was the story of my mother's side. And so I think that I often am trying to explore that through a different lens. And I also think that belonging is sort of a central question of childhood. We all want to feel like we belong. And sometimes we contort ourselves, we hide parts of ourselves to try to find belonging. But is that belonging? Is that a false sense of belonging? And all the trapdoors that go along with that, I think, are really interesting places to explore and open those conversations with young people.
Oh, I think it's fantastic. I'm in suburban Chicago too. I should mention that in the green room, And my kids are fourth generation Berwyn, Illinois. Like, this town hasn't been around for more than 115 years. And my dad's dad, my grandfather, decided that when he was after he had his stroke, he was an old man. He wanted to go back to the old country. He wanted to go back to where he was from, so he could die there. Now, of course, he lived for another 10 years because the food was better. He loved it over there, the belongingness of our family story is not uniquely American. It's perfectly American. It sounds like yours is too.
Yeah, I think that especially with Other Words for Home, what I talk with students about a lot is that when I was a young person, I felt that the weight of my hyphenated identity, and I felt like that hyphen was a divider. I really felt like I had to choose between being American and being Arab, or being Muslim and being American. And I didn't have really any media or books that told me a different story. And now I like to engage in this conversation exercise with kids about how so many of us who are Americans have hyphenated identities, and how there's so much beauty and power in the hyphenated identity, and how the hyphen can maybe be a connector as opposed to a divider. But I definitely think that when I was a young person, I didn't feel that, and I definitely didn't get that messaging from the books that I was reading.
The hyphenated story, I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And we're recording right now in early March. We've got St. Patrick's Day coming up, but I also think about St. Joseph's Day for the Italian Americans, and I think about we're in Ramadan right now.
Yes.
And the opportunity. Okay, like up until a couple weeks ago, with the start of the Trump administration, those DEI, the inclusion, the equity, the diversity of all that was something we could talk about. That we were having hard conversations about it. Right now, though, it's starting to become something that's outlawed. I mean, it's outrageous to me. It's absolutely outrageous to me. And you, as a Newbery Honor winner, the idea that good books about true stories, whether they're fictionalized or historical fiction. I mean, what's it like right now to be writing in that kind of a context? What's it like to try and talk to students and their families right now in this kind of context?
Yeah, I mean, I personally feel extraordinarily lucky for the school visits that I have had. All of them have been really positive experiences where the community has really purposely chosen to bring me because they have these values, and they also recognize that all of their students are diverse, right? That diversity doesn't mean one thing. It means celebrating all the different parts of all of our students and encouraging them to share their stories. I think that I always say that I like writing for young people because I feel like it's an invitation. Every book is an invitation for them to find their voice and tell their story. And that's what's really meaningful to me. And of course, that is a heartbreaking idea, to think that kids are going to have less access to that. I think about just how much more diverse the shelves are today. I look at what my own kids have access to and the way that they're able to read the world and read their classroom. And their classroom is full of classmates who have a variety of different ethnic and racial and religious backgrounds, and they're able to read books that help them to better understand their classmates' lives. They have books that help them better understand their own family history. And I think we're all richer communities for that. And better classmates and friends. And so I really hope that those books can stay on shelves, because I personally see the power of that when I go to school visits. And actually, I guess on an uplifting note, one of the things that has been really gratifying for me of doing school visits for the last 6 or so years is that I always talk about my own childhood growing up in a small town a little bit outside of Cincinnati, and how I was the only kid in my class whose parent was an immigrant. We were the only Muslim family, and the kids always look shocked. They look shocked that that was my experience. And that makes me so happy that so many of our kids today are having more diverse life experiences and seeing their community as and so I think our kids, this is natural to them. They know that, and they're interested to learn about their classmates. I see how excited my own kids get when they learn about Lunar New Year, or they learn about Hanukkah at school, or they learn about Diwali, and they love coming home and sharing that information. And again, I just think that these aren't, I don't understand the fear that has been created around it, but to me, it just is creating a way for all of us to be better community members.
So can you share a little bit about the audiences that you like to go visit with? I mean, what grade level in middle school, YA? What are you into with Other Words from Home and a Rover?
Yeah, so I mean, for Other Words from Home, that's a book that I would say I primarily talk to 4th to 8th graders. With Rover's story, I probably talk mostly to 3rd to 7th graders.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of spanning that whole band, right? So sometimes I talk with upper elementary, sometimes I'm talking with middle schoolers, and you certainly speak differently with both of those groups of students. But I really, especially when I'm doing Other Words for Home, the topics we talk a lot about what their home means to them, the idea of home, what it would be like to have to leave their own home. I think that's where literature is really powerful, right? As an empathy builder, as a way to sort of think about an experience you might not have had. I think I talk with them about how news media, I think, flattens humanity. And so whether we're talking about conflicts in the Middle East or elsewhere in the world, when we have these mind-boggling numbers about people who have lost their lives or lost their homes, it's easy to forget that every single one of those people had a really specific experience. I think I'm really hyper aware of the way that the Middle East is depicted in media because of my own background. And so we talk a lot about that. We talk a lot about how I don't like this idea that my book is meant to humanize Arabs, because I don't think they need humanizing. It's more that I think the reader becomes more human from being able to maybe see a group of people in a different light than they have before. And so we have that conversation. We talk a little bit about some of the customs in Islam that I think are misunderstood, how and how in certain countries in the Middle East, women are forced to cover their hair, and how we can all agree that that's a horrible thing, that no one should be forced to wear something they don't want to wear. A regime should not tell women, how to dress. Well, at the same time, there are lots of women in other countries in the Middle East and here in America who are actively choosing to want to cover their hair as a way to represent their personal relationship with their faith, and how two things can look the same but not be the same thing. And I think that's a really important and interesting conversation to have with young people. And I have that more with the older kids, whereas the younger kids, I do more of the work of sort of talking about home and having them sort of build sort of a quilt of words about that they think of when they come to think of their own home and all of those types of things. And then we sort of share I'll ask, who here has an immigrant parent or an immigrant grandparent? You'd be amazed how many hands go up, and the pride that they have in that and wanting to share those stories. And then my big hope is that they go back to their classroom and they maybe try their hand at writing a poem about their own immigration history or ethnic background.
Oh, I think that those two age groups, while there is some overlap there, the capabilities, I think you're landing in a good spot. I'm not an educator. I don't pretend to be an educator, but it sounds like from a developmentally relevant lens, that makes a lot of sense. And yet there's parents, there are educators, there are administrators who are hesitant to bring you in, I'm sure. What do you say to those adults?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes me, again, I'm a little bit confused by it. Like when a book like Other Words for Home gets banned, I feel a little bit confused because it's a very gentle book. It's a book about a young girl who she loves American rom-coms. She loves Whitney Houston. She comes to America. She's excited to try out for the school musical. To me, it's actually a book that really celebrates America. I think about the way my family members on my father's side sort of lionize America, the dream of America. And the book kind of plays with that. I mean, it obviously shows her struggles, but it also talks about all the opportunities she has here that she didn't have back in Syria. And I'm really proud of that. And so it always confuses me when there's this idea of that it's an anti-American book or there's anti-American sentiment, when to me, it's actually a celebration of the things that I think make America extraordinary and a great place. And also makes me feel really sad for my 10, 11-year-old self who never got to see a book like Other Words for Home on the shelf, but has seen how meaningful it is for kids. When I go into school visits, I have so many kids run up to me and say, that looks like my mom on the cover. That looks like my sister. That looks like me. And for them to have that experience that I didn't get to have, but to now know that so many kids maybe in Florida or Texas are being denied that opportunity, that also makes me really sad. And again, I feel a little bit baffled because I actually took my personal email off my website because I didn't like some of the emails I was receiving when it was clear someone had talked about the book at some type of meeting and I think had mischaracterized the book. And so that's where I also feel like a lot of these books, the content of them hasn't actually fully been read, and we're just banning them based upon the ethnicity or religious background of the main character. And to me, that's incredibly troubling, and I hope would be troubling to most people.
We know from some great reporting that's been done by the New York Times, in particular, the Washington Post, their serial book banners out there. They go through a list. They got a list, and they're just checking off the list. And the old adage about you can't judge a book by its cover. They're very happy to ban one based on the characteristics of the author, the cover, the story, or something that's on some list from some national organization that's driven by an agenda. So, Jasmine, I really appreciate you spending a little time with me solo. I want to do the same thing with Abdi. I want to bring you back in then, and we want to have some more time to chat. Is that cool?
Sounds great. Yeah.
Great. And you two know each other, right? Isn't that true? Good. So we can say hello. And we can say, yes. Okay, good. Jasmine, I want to put you in the green room, though. Okay, Abdi Nazemian, I appreciate you today very much for being here. We want to talk about 2 of your books and then also talk about some of the big things going on. Like a Love Story and Desert Echoes in particular, queer identity, queer heritage, your approach to story writing. I know it's personal. It must be, I don't want to put words in your mouth right now, but I'm a straight cisgendered white guy from the suburbs. Okay, I don't have any parallel writing today. Do you feel it's different now in March of 2025 than it was even in November or October of 2024?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, since then, Like a Love Story has been banned statewide in Utah as a result of the law that passed there. It's the first time that book has been banned in many, many districts individually, but it's the first time it's had a statewide ban. And the way that law is written is pretty alarming. I was reading the details of it. You can't even bring the book for personal reading into any public schools. If it is found, it must be disposed of in a very specific way that makes it seem.
Let's take 1 second and for our listeners and our watchers today, if a book in Utah is banned by 3 school districts, it's banned statewide, provided that the state board allows it to happen, sort of a passive thing. And then what you're saying about the new law, about you can't even bring it into the school, where are we living?
We're living in the United States of America.
Yeah.
And we're living in the world. And look, like Jasmine said, I didn't grow up, me too. I grew up coming to the United States at the age of 10. I'm Iranian. I was born in Iran. I'm gay. When I was growing up, being gay and Iranian were not 2 things that could ever have fit together. The first novel I ever wrote, from what I understand, is the first novel ever to have a gay male protagonist as a lead character. So we quite literally did not exist in media before that. And that was only a decade or so ago.
Mm-hmm.
So in many ways, I feel incredibly grateful that I get to write these books, that so many other queer Iranian authors are also telling stories now. On the other hand, we're meeting with resistance. I suppose one thing I would like to say is I'm not surprised. A lot of what my books talk about is resistance to social movements. Like a Love Story deals with AIDS activism in the late 80s and early 90s in New York City. It's about ACT UP. It's funny, I don't like to reread my books, but I had to reread that one because it's coming out soon in the UK, and I had to proofread some changes I wanted to make. And I was shocked by how much I put in that book before I knew any of this would happen. In that book, there's a character who's a ACT UP activist, a person living with AIDS, a mentor to 3 teenagers, and he talks about how queer history will never be taught in schools. They will not, the powers that be will not share our history. And so it is our job as queer mentors and storytellers to share our history with young people. That is something I wrote before my books were ever banned, before I could imagine it. And I think that's because I grew up in a time of great resistance to every part of my identity, queer and Iranian. So I think, and I say this in the author's note of Like a Love Story, that we, in teaching history, we often focus on let's not repeat history, let's not repeat the worst of history. My thinking when I write my historical novels is let's study history so we can repeat the best of it, because we've been here before. Trump is not an anomaly, and I think we do a disservice to this country when we treat him as such. He is following a playbook that we know very well, and we need to study the people who managed to resist in the past so we can think and respond intelligently.
The question here is a very personal question. You don't have to answer it for me, but your family in Iran, going through the revolution, I would assume. I don't know how old you are, you know?
Everyone knows how old I am based on the revolution. Iranians can't lie about their age. This is Disco.
Hey, Disco.
Keep me company for the personal questions.
Oh,
yes,
Disco was in the intro. Everybody's expecting to see Disco, you know?
There he is.
So what I'm trying to ask is, have you had conversations with family members and friends and folks who came over in the diaspora about what's happening in America right now? That are there resonant points? Like I said, you don't have to answer that in detail.
No, I'm going to say something that I feel is the thing I need to say that makes me very unpopular in a lot of rooms, which is that, like many immigrant communities, many of the Iranian people in my life, thankfully not my parents anymore, but many are very conservative. That is the case, as I tell many of my friends who live in liberal American bubbles like the one I live in Los Angeles. The truth is many immigrants are conservative. The truth is I struggled a great deal coming out as an Iranian. I was not embraced and accepted by my family or community right away. But I also was never kicked out of the house, was never treated with any kind of violence that made me not want to show up at the dinner tables and the vacations and do the work. And it has been my great privilege of trying to open my community's hearts to queer life and to be a real figure in my community. The thing I struggle with so much, and the thing I want to say, is that throughout my entire life, from when I came out as a gay man in New York, Western liberal members of the queer community have always wanted me to turn my back on anyone who doesn't support me fully as a gay man, and that includes my family and my community. And I've never been willing to do that, and I never will. And just recently, I had a really negative interaction with a group of people who wanted to put me on the spot at a party to explain brown voters and Muslim voters for Trump as if I'm some kind of
representative of the whole thing.
And when I did try, out of the kindness and generosity of my heart, to get into the reasons why certain people might feel a certain way about long-term US policies that predate Trump as it pertains to the Middle East and Arab world, they very much, I just felt like people were turning against me. And one person sent me a very nasty text who basically said I was minimizing, my community's stances. And it's very hard for me because so in my novel, Only This Beautiful Moment, which, I'll give myself a little shout out and thank you, librarians, won the Stonewall Award. I mean, that book is about 3 generations of Iranian men, and it talks about the wounds of what happened in 1953 in Iran, which is something nobody in this country, even the most educated, seem to know, which is that the United States, in one of the CIA's first major acts, I think the first coup, was that they ended democracy in Iran. Yeah. And it set about a chain of events that led to huge trauma in my family and virtually every Iranian family I know. And it's very hard for me as an Iranian immigrant to this community who always feels stuck between the many sides of my hyphenated self to feel like I have to somehow explain the Iranian and the Middle Eastern and Arab psyche to Americans who don't seem to have the curiosity to know about their own country's actions in our part of the world. And so that is what my frustration, to be honest, is far more with the United States and its people for not showing any curiosity towards us and for not wanting to even know the reasons and the history.
Abdi, I count myself a little lucky that I know about 1953.
Oh, wow. You are one of the only ones. Because even, and I say this, I have very educated friends. Nobody knows. Well,
I mean, I'm not suggesting that I'm a scholar, but I do try and pay attention to American history. And the diaspora also, I mean, there's some hella good Persian restaurants in LA, man.
Yes, there are.
Yes. So how did they get here? Who are they? So that's part of part of me as a cultural hobbyist, I guess.
Well, that's nice. And look, I say that, like, of course, the fact that I get to write my books in the US, the fact that librarians award them, that I get to talk, these are the things I love about the United States. I say this, I think many of us who try to talk about how we make things better are doing it because we know that this is a place we can make them better. This is where we can start that process that then, I mean, I was reminded of it at the Academy Awards last night, where you see I have a big presence in Brazil. And for Brazil, that was a moment of national unity and pride. And, you know, here in the United States, we have the ability to start conversations and tell stories that travel the whole world and change the world. And that can be both good and bad. And we've seen that through history.
Yeah. Let's talk about your storytelling for another moment here. Like a Love Story, Desert Echoes, your other books, when you spend time with groups of students, like I asked Jasmine about audience and age, you know, who do you enjoy talking to? Who's your audience?
Well, I only write young adult novels. I haven't gone younger. I also have 2 children who are teenagers now. They just became teenagers. So I have a very vested interest in the youth of this country and in hopefully making the world a little better for them. I visit high schools most often, though I also often talk to teachers, librarians. For me, visiting high schools is so much fun. Young people, I think, have an innate curiosity. And that is so gratifying as somebody who tells stories that often aren't told. They, you know, when I talk, especially to young people who see themselves in the book, and it's not just, I also think it's really important for young people who don't see themselves in the book just to learn about perspectives they may not know, but, you know, to talk to queer teenagers who didn't know anything about ACT UP or about queer life in Iran, you know, to talk to young Iranians who had never read a queer protagonist or had never even read any Iranian protagonist. I mean, those interactions are so meaningful. And to, you know, people will tell me stories. I mean, they're very personal, but about how the books changed their lives. You know, there's still so much stigma around HIV and AIDS. And one reader told me about how after reading Like a Love Story, she started talking to her dad about it and where were her parents during the worst years of the AIDS crisis. And that's how she found out her uncle died of AIDS, which had been a family secret up until then because many families didn't talk about that. So, you know, you hear stories like that and it's just, it's mind blowing. It really feels like you're making a personal connection to each young reader. And hopefully,
are the schools still inviting you right now?
I mean, school visits, as many authors talk about, have greatly decreased because of the book bans. I think that is, and I do not fault the schools. I certainly do not fault any librarian. In all my school visits, I feel such empathy and horror for what librarians are going through. Many of them are on the front lines of the threats and the questions coming from parents. Many of them can't get books approved anymore and are paying out of pocket. Almost every librarian and educator I know seems to tell me they're paying for things out of pocket, which, you know, I know my cousin is an educator. I know the pay is not such that you should be paying for anything out of pocket. So I don't blame them, but I think that the reality is there's just a culture of fear. You know, even if the books aren't banned in a certain district, it's created a culture of fear around bringing authors. They can't guarantee security. They can't, they just can't take the risk of having an author who might, you know, bring that danger to the community.
You know, the lack of comfort in the majority is a theme in this whole series. Let me bring our colleague Jasmine back to help us wrap up this conversation with a couple of more minutes. Jasmine, any reactions here to what Abdi's been talking about? The hyphen, you know, that you mentioned earlier, you know, he brought back up as well.
Well, I really related to what you were talking about of being asked to sort of answer and explain and translate. I also think there can be a flattening of the immigrant experience that exists in the mind of white liberal America too. And that in itself is something that I feel strongly about, the diversity within the diversity. I always talk about how the way that I write a Muslim girl is not the universal experience of being a Muslim girl. And I want there to be more voices. And then I also really loved what you said about the reason that we ask the questions about America are because we love this country and we want it to live up to that promise. I think about like how many people risked everything to want to come here. And it almost makes me teary when I think about my own family history. And I think that's why, for those of us who have had in our family some kind of traumatic separation from our country of origin, there's this feeling of really wanting here to be home and to live up to that promise. And that comes from a place of love. And I think that gets misunderstood too. And is the part that gets really upsetting to me, that like anti-American label that gets around.
America's a complicated place, but having conversations about America is not anti-American. You know, it shouldn't be, at least. And I hope we can hold on to that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, too, that I think what Abdi, I don't want to speak for you and characterize your work, but I always say when I talk about my books, and I would put your books in this category, that I like to expand our cultural imagination of who is an American also, and have that conversation with kids of who is an American, what is an American, and how that's sort of the central project of this country, is constantly expanding that idea and thinking about it. And I share that one of my most formative childhood memories is in first grade, when my father became a naturalized citizen of the United States, and going down to that courthouse and wondering what does that mean? What does this mean? And sort of continuing to play that out. And so I think that it shouldn't be a question that scares people. That should be a question that invigorates people and is an interesting question to think about, and hopefully a meaningful one, especially for young people.
Oh, I love it. Okay, let me ask you a nice little wrap-up question, team, if we could. I appreciate the time that we're spending together. And I want to be sure to get back to the kids, get back to the students, get back to that conversation. There's always the question of I mean, you put yourself in front of any group of children. I'm not somebody who goes in front of groups of children very frequently. I'm looking for the delightful story, the embarrassing story, the one that made you go, I never thought about my book that way before. I don't mean to throw both of you like that.
I have one. It's a little bit not my book, but just I think the way children's brains work and how amazing it is, that I once had a little girl raise her hand and ask me what my favorite thing about my dad is, what I admire the most about him, and to take away this idea of sort of family stories, and that obviously my family was important to me, and for that to be the big question. But again, I think that gets to the central idea of the way we all relate to one another, that I think what she was really thinking about was her relationship with her own dad. And that's, I think kids, they lots of times, I don't know, you speak with older kids, so you might have a different experience, but I get a lot of the like, this isn't really a question, this is a statement. And then they tell me like the thought that is on their mind.
That's fair.
I mean, for me, the biggest thing, it's not the response to the books tends to just be so wonderful and curious, and they want to know more and soak up the reasons why I write the books. It's more the kindness. I find that like the school visits are so full of just kind gestures. They often give gifts. They write notes. Like I usually don't open them until I leave, but you'll read these cards that teenagers write you after reading the book, and often they tell personal stories about themselves, or they find out a lot about my life from the books and from me talking to them, and they wish my family well. And I think, it's such a divided world, and I'm not at all one of those people who's like, let's all get along. I think there is very clearly authoritarian fascists trying to take over, and we have to resist. But what I do really believe is that many people are afraid of interacting with each other, and I'm really not. And one thing I love about going into rooms with people and looking in their eyes is sharing myself with them and sharing my heart, and then in turn they know it's okay to share theirs, and it just creates one connection at a time, a kinder world. So
that's fantastic. Thank you both for taking this time to share like this with me, with our watchers, our listeners. I hope that the educators and the school librarians and the parents who are watching can find some new courage to have these conversations again. I understand the empathy that I appreciate the empathy that you're bringing to these conversations right now about it's hard to invite. It's a fraught time in America, and yet at the same time, I think that we can have a uniquely American conversation together in that setting if we have the courage. So I'm going to drop your .coms on here, Abdi. This is your .com. Jasmine,
Yeah.
this is your .com. And then this is everylibraries.org, folks. If you need help with censorship and book bans, if you want to have a conversation about library funding, if the services of a National Political Action Committee for libraries would be helpful and useful to you folks, please reach out, everylibrary.org. Thank you both. I enjoyed this conversation very much today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a great one, team. See you.